September 25, 1066. 7,000 Vikings stood without armor. By sunset, the age of the Northmen was finished forever. This is how 250 years of terror ended in a single afternoon. They called him the Thunderbolt of the North. Harald Hardrada had fought in more battles than any man alive. He had served Byzantine emperors, crushed rebellions from Russia to Sicily, and accumulated more gold than entire kingdoms possessed. At 50 years old, with nothing left to prove, he assembled the largest Viking fleet in a generation. 300 longships. Over 10,000 warriors. His target was England's crown itself. But here is what nobody tells you about history's last great Viking king. Harald Hardrada was not invading blind. He had something far more valuable than ships or swords. He had a promise. An English earl had sworn that half the kingdom would rise in his support. That promise would cost Harald everything. Because the man who made it was already planning his betrayal. The man who lured Harald to his death was Tostig Godwin's son. And here is where it gets complicated. Tostig was the brother of England's own king. Harald Godwin's son had taken the throne just 9 months earlier, and Tostig believed it should have been his. Exiled, humiliated, and burning with fraternal hatred, Tostig sailed to Norway with an offer no Viking could refuse. He promised Harald that northern England would welcome him as a liberator. The people there were still half Danish, he said. They remembered the old ways. They would rise against his brother the moment Viking boots touched English soil. If this sounds too convenient, too perfect, you are already smarter than the greatest Viking warrior of his generation. Because Tostig was lying. The northern English had no intention of supporting anyone. They just wanted to be left alone. Now let me put this in perspective. Harald Hardrada was not a fool. He had survived 3 decades of the most brutal politics in the medieval world. He had watched men he trusted try to kill him in Constantinople. He had navigated Byzantine court intrigue that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's story. So why did he believe Tostig? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about even the greatest leaders. Harald wanted to believe. After 30 years of fighting other people's wars, he wanted a kingdom of his own. And Tostig was telling him exactly what he needed to hear. But there was another factor. Harald had a saga to complete. In Norse culture, a man's reputation lived forever in the songs sung about him. A king who died raiding was a hero. A king who died in bed was forgotten. Harald was 50 years old. This was his last chance for glory. The invasion began well. Too well. The Viking fleet landed near York in mid-September. They defeated a local English army at the Battle of Fulford and accepted the city's surrender. Northern England, it seemed, was falling exactly as Tostig had promised. Harald made a mistake that experience should have prevented. He let his guard down. The morning of September 25, 1066, Harald marched his army 8 miles east to Stamford Bridge. They were expecting English hostages, not a battle. So they left their armor behind on the ships. Think about that for a moment. 7,000 of the finest warriors in Northern Europe, men who had spent their lives preparing for combat, walked into enemy territory wearing only their tunics. No chain mail. No helmets. No shields. What they found waiting at Stamford Bridge was not a group of hostages. But that is not even the worst part. While Harald was celebrating in York, King Harald Godwin's son was doing something that should have been impossible. He was marching the entire English army 185 miles in just 4 days. That is over 45 miles per day. Modern soldiers with paved roads and proper footwear consider 25 miles a forced march. Harald Godwinson's men did nearly twice that, in leather boots, on medieval roads, carrying weapons and supplies. Military historians still debate how he achieved it. When the English army appeared on the hills above Stamford Bridge, Harald Hardrada realized the truth. Tostig had not promised half the kingdom. He had promised an ambush. And Harald had walked directly into it, with 7,000 men wearing only their shirts. What happened next has become legend. A single Viking warrior held the bridge. For nearly an hour, one man with one axe stopped the entire English army. He killed more than 40 soldiers before someone floated under the bridge in a barrel and stabbed him from below. That nameless berserker bought time for Harald to form a defensive circle on the eastern bank. But time could not solve the fundamental problem. Unarmored Vikings against armored English houseguards. The mathematics were brutal. A sword that would glance off chainmail cut straight through wool and leather. For 3 hours, Harald Hardrada and his men fought anyway. At some point in the afternoon, Harald himself fell. An arrow struck him in the throat. The Thunderbolt of the North died on his feet, still swinging his two-handed sword. Of the 10,000 Vikings who landed in England, fewer than 2,000 made it home. They filled only 24 ships. The rest were buried in Yorkshire soil or left for the crows. And here is the revelation that makes Stamford Bridge so significant. This was not just a battle. It was the end of an era. For 250 years, Viking longships had been the most feared sight in the Western world. Monasteries from Ireland to Italy had prayed for deliverance from the fury of the Northmen. After September 25, 1066, they never needed to pray again. The Viking Age ended not with a gradual decline but with a single afternoon of slaughter beside an English river. Harald Hardrada, the last of the great sea kings, had gambled everything on a traitor's promise. And the saga of the Northmen closed forever. 3 weeks after Stamford Bridge, William of Normandy landed in the south. King Harold Godwin's son marched his exhausted army back down the length of England. At Hastings, he lost everything. The English kingdom that had just defeated the last Vikings fell to the Normans. And perhaps that is the final lesson of this story. Harald Hardrada trusted the wrong man and died for it. Harold Godwin's son trusted his own strength and lost his kingdom anyway. Empires rise and empires fall, but the men who build them rarely see the ending coming. Harold died believing he was reaching for glory. He had no way of knowing that he was closing a chapter of history that had lasted nearly 3 centuries. The longships would never return. The age of the sea kings was over. And a new world was about to begin. Now you know how the Viking Age truly ended. Not in legend but in blood, betrayal, and one man's desperate reach for glory. Which fallen empire should we explore next? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to see how other mighty kingdoms met their ends, subscribe now. Thrones crumble. Empires fall. The stories remain.